wanters. So if you come up with an idea, be ready to do it. And you can yell at me after church and I might bark back. Israel, it didn't cost them anything yet to have a king. They got what they wanted. Hey, go home, cool. No one was there for Saul. No one said, hey, got this land. It's in our old holy city somewhere that David will settle later. But no, he went back to Gibeah. The thought is, I want a king, but I don't want to be the one to give to him. I guess the thought I'm trying to get across in my head is, this is on the people of Israel right now. This isn't on King Saul. They left pleased to have a king over them. It didn't cost them a thing. Verse 26, and Saul also went home to Gibeah, and there went with him a band of men whose hearts God had touched. We'll study the Gibeah part later. But he went home. He went to his father's house. The first king of Israel went home to daddy. If you pray for something, if Brother Roger's planting and he prays for rain, what did he need to do after he prayed? Prepare his fields. If you ask for a king, you need to start making preparations for a king. Israel failed him. He went home. Side note, parents, it's important to establish a home that your child could come home to. You may have President Braden coming home one day. He's got to have a place to come to. It's important to have roots. Saul returns home a king. Hey, Dad, I'm king, by the way. What's for supper? You see the picture? I believe he was still pretty humble. He goes home just as poor as he left. He goes home, nothing had changed. We don't see him puffed up. We don't see any pride. We don't see him with honor. He just has a title, which means work is coming. Titles bring power oftentimes, but it really should bring responsibility. That's what a title is. It's responsibility. At Gibeah, he had no place, no throne, no court. What was there was familiarity, which has its place in our lives, but Saul would have to establish his own place for a palace, his own area. He was going to be busy until he died. I think he knew that. So how are the people affected by their new king? For 99.9% of the population, it hadn't had an effect on them yet. They left not paying anything. They left getting what they wanted. The freeloading's continuing. It's been there since day one. All right? There's always going to be people who want to ride and don't want to pull. Perhaps their own personal affairs were more important to them than the affairs of their own nation. They said, well, we got it. I got other stuff to do. Cows need to be fed. But if we desire something, it's going to come at a cost. Nothing's free. Except salvation. But that come at a cost. But then there are those men, there was a few who God chose to touch. It says that perhaps God had made more tender-hearted to this new king than the rest. Not the body of the people, not the whole nation, but just a small company of men who, because God touched them, because God told them they needed to go, because they respected the newfound authority, went home with Saul that showed his family that something was different, to protect him, to protect their new king. I like this verse, and I don't have time to really teach it like I want to, like my notes. This wasn't in them naturally. God had to put it in them. The wisdom, the caring that we have comes from God. It's not a natural thing for me to, hey, you having a good week? I've heard you, I'm concerned. Selfish me doesn't want that. That's the spirit in me. God had to touch these men and say, you need to go with him. He might need a little encouragement. He might need to know somebody's got his back. He needs to know somebody in this nation cares. Let's move on to verse 27. It says, but the children of Belial said, how shall this man save us? And they despised him and brought him no presents, but he held his peace. There's always going to be an enemy. There's always haters out there. When I read the word Belial, I think of Nabal. That's Abigail's husband, who David later took for his wife. He was described that way. It's selfish. It's wanting gain. It's whether it be money or power. You're not willing to help. There's those that watch it happen and then say you should have done it this way. They're takers. They're not givers. They ride the wagon. They don't pull the wagon. We all could probably think of people like that. Belial, men who would never endure the yoke, that were pleased with nothing that either God or Samuel did, so now they despise Saul. They were never happy. They always needed drama in their life. David had to deal with these men. How shall this man save us? They look at the man rather than the God of the man. That's the problem. Their faith should have never been in Saul. It should have been, I need to pray for him. If you got a problem with somebody, if you haven't prayed for them yet, that problem ain't going to go away. They see the smallness of the tribe. They see the lack of power and money in the family. They see the estate lacking. The education's non-existent. And they say, how shall this man save us? And I'll never forget, there ain't no idiot like an educated idiot, right? There's a lot of educated idiots in the world today. It don't matter what kind of man he was. What mattered was the God of the man. These kind of men, they don't propose a better idea. When it's time to talk, they don't talk. But man, they sure like to tell you how you should have done it. They sure like to tell you about the problems they got with it. But they don't want to be part of the solution. That's how I would describe the men of Belial. Monday morning quarterback. Should have done it this way. It's easy to say how you should have done it after it all unfolds, right? They don't join in and falling in line. Every leader, big or small, nation or team, had to learn the lesson that Saul's learning. There are going to be those against you. I'm a man, so I'm going to relate to the men. Every man in here has to learn that lesson. There's going to be people who don't like you. It may be your fault, probably is, but it may not be. It's something we've got to learn to deal with. It's something Saul's going to have to learn to deal with. He couldn't let every little person who had a problem with him affect the way he ran this kingdom. You got to learn the power source. You got to learn where encouragement comes from. You got to learn who you can rely on, even if it's for a short period of time. You know, it could very well be those most angry, these men were the same ones who were eager to go ask for a king to begin with. They just like to keep it stirred up. But then when it wasn't them or it wasn't the person they thought it was, that's when they had a problem. Hey, I want a king. Oh, but I didn't want him for a king, even though that's who God chose. They're keeping it stirred up all the time. They didn't get what they wanted. So a couple things real quick in closing. How do we know where to stand? What is God's will? Do you always know God's personal, specific will for your life? I'm going to tell you, probably not. How do you react if you don't? You react godly. You do what's right. You love, you forgive. You read this and you keep these laws. Even if you don't know, you're waiting on God to reveal that to you. You've got to stay in his will to understand his will. So we have to have godly reactions, right? We can't react like these men. We're to be patient. We're to react with love. The thought of how shall this man save us, I believe there's a gospel message right there. Man after man has asked himself about Jesus Christ. Even if they never understood it, they're looking and they're saying, how in the world can this be? Even when Jesus was crucified, I believe that there were those that were wondering. We don't have time to do that today, but Christ more than a man, that might come out later. How shall this man save us? They are offended at him or in him. They're broken by it. They can't get over the fact that he's now king. How did the first king of Israel handle the haters? Just like he needed to. He kept his peace. He didn't have to react. He held his peace. We don't have to react to everything. It's okay to be patient, to see if things are going to unfold and work out, to see if God's going to deal with it so we don't have to make a mess of it. I think he knew this was his fears coming true, that there were going to be some like this. Maybe he didn't expect it to show up this fast. But that's how Satan works. He's quick. He held his peace. He didn't want them to know it mattered to him. He knew we don't need a kingdom divided the first week. One of the books I read when I was a kid, and I hate to say it, was about a Dallas Cowboy running back, Emmitt Smith. And he'd say, I'd go and I'd be running and I'd get hit. And I'd get up and I couldn't walk. It hurt so bad. But I never let the defense see it because they were going to hit me there again. Saul couldn't let them know it was getting to him. Even if it's tearing him apart inside. If they knew it was getting to him, what are they going to do? They're just going to ramp it up, right? He reacted perfect. Humility, modesty, a touch of mercy in what we see, I believe. He was king. Who would blame him if he reacted to this and said, hey, those guys, get them out. I'm king. Who would blame him? He's king. He has the authority. But I believe he reacted with a little wisdom. He knew the kingdom needed to be united, not divided. So there's always going to be those that are jealous, those who want to tear us down instead of build us up. But I'm going to ask you the question. Let's flip that around. Who are you? Do you encourage? Do you build up? Or do you tear down? Or do we tend to have a more negative outlook? Half empty or half full? I'm trying to speed through my notes. Do we just exist? Do we inspire? Do we preach it? Or do we live it? Where do we fall here? Do we fall with the people who just went home, who just exist? Do we fall with the men of Belial who are tearing down, who always want to say, well, we could have done it better? Or do we fall with those who support? Christ held his peace. I would expect nothing less of God's man, especially the king of God's people. So keep praying, and Lord willing, we'll continue studying this if it's God's will until it's not. So, Brother Tyler, would you close for us?